Amy, welcome. We're here. If you don't know who Amy is one of our friends here at Hope Family Care. Amy, would you mind sharing a little bit of your story with us?
Yes. So back in 2018, I was married to a man named Bill, and he was going out to the lake house with his buddies, and there happened to be a tragic accident at the lake house, and shortly after, within 24 hours, Bill passed away and went to be with Jesus. And so at the time, I was pregnant with our daughter, now Marley, and we had a son, Ollie, who was 22 months. Yeah.
I'm so sorry for that.
Thank you.
And what you guys may not know is we actually have multiple mutual connections through different, completely unrelated people. We had heard your story. And then, it was one of those things that kind of sits in the back of your mind for a while. And then probably a little time afterwards, we at Hope Family Care, we were working on developing Hope Unshakeable. And we connected up with a partner ministry called Songs in the Night, which you are a part of. And so would you mind sharing a little bit about that connection?
Yeah. So Songs in the Night was started by a young widow too, Brooke Talley. And I had met Brooke Talley through a young widow Zoom group through Nothing is Wasted Ministries. And we had just built a friendship, and she had already started Songs in the Night and was doing care crates. But through, that friendship and developing it, Songs of the Night has developed, other aspects to the ministry to help young widows, or widows in general, actually, to walk alongside each other long-term in discipleship, to, hold each other's stories, grieve with each other, speak truth with each other. It's really the heart to, carry each other's story, not just in the aftermath, the quick aftermath, but for long-term to be with widows and their children. So that's kind of how I got plugged into Songs in the Night through Brooke.
Yeah. And then we at Hope Family Care, we are connected with Nothing is Wasted Ministries. We're one of their partner ministries. And so through their certified coaching, ongoing meetings, Zooms, we connected up with you, we connected up with Brooke. And as we share each time that we would get together, we'd share about what God's doing in our different ministries. We were sharing about Hope Unshakeable. And Brooke approached us about Hope Unshakeable for child loss and said, hey, would you mind sending me a copy so that I could look at that and see if that's something we could use for spouse loss? And so just to make a longer story short, we began to work with Amy and Brooke to develop spouse loss. What was that process like for you guys?
Yeah, so Brooke had told me kind of the connection she had with y'all and Hope Family Care and the curriculum that y'all had written. And she was saying, wouldn't we could partner with them and do this for spouse loss, because there's a lot of grief curriculums, but specific to spouse loss, there's not as many resources. So she said, would you want to partner with me, and we could, kind of collaborate with them and what they already have, and then make it specific to spouse loss. And so that was kind of the process. And so, through Zoom calls, and then I went out to Florida for a long weekend. We had, we wrote the curriculum together.
Yeah. And we're so excited because here's a view of Hope Unshakable spouse loss. What we love that God is doing through Hope Family Care is our heart, because of our story, has always been to support families who've experienced child loss. We had no idea that God wanted something much bigger than that. And so spouse loss is something that, for me, my story is not that. And so I can't really speak into it as an authority. There are aspects, like you said, of grief that there's commonality between them, but I can't speak into that. And so we're so excited that God would connect us with you guys with Songs in the Night to do that and create this curriculum. Also, just kind of a little preview or a little promo for it. Through Songs in the Night, we're partnering together to work on parent loss, because that's a story that I think oftentimes, or a griever that is oftentimes forgotten in a way, like for us with child loss, that the siblings are forgotten. And so when a spouse passes away, there's multiple aspects of loss. What was that like, walking with your son and now daughter through that?
Yeah, I think there's a unique aspect to, you don't only lose your spouse, but you lose the parent, your child's parent. So through that, even though my kids were young, being pregnant, she hadn't even been born yet, but they grieve, they have questions, they have emotions, even at a young age, there is a need for them to have space to grieve and be able to process age appropriately what it was to lose their parent. And I'm even seeing that now through my daughter who's 4, even though she was not born yet, she understands that there is an aspect to our family that is gone and there's an aspect that is missing. And so, there's very much a need for the children that have lost their parent to have a space, not only within their mom speaking into that or their dad, if you're a widow or widower, but just a community of people. I've seen also my kids meeting Brooke's son in particular has been huge for them to connect, or other widows will get their Christmas cards in the mail and my son will be like, oh, their daddy's in heaven too. So just the understanding for them to be able to not only just grieve within the family unit, but also to have that community to say, they understand too what my story has held.
Yeah, I think that aspect of community is incredible, because if you look at scripture, even right in Genesis, you see in the beginning that God existed, and God, being the triune God, existed in perfect community. Yeah. And I think he's always wanted that aspect of community for our lives. And I firmly believe that true healing happens in the context of community. And one of the things about grief is that it's so isolating, even between, for example, my wife and I. When we grieve differently, because she was a mom, I was a dad. For you, obviously, grieving the loss of a spouse, you are in that relationship alone, because that relationship has been lost here on earth. Yeah. So what are some of those aspects of spouse loss that are kind of unique to you guys walking through that as widow or widower? And maybe you speak more from the widow standpoint, obviously. But what are some of those components that are different?
Yeah, I think some unique pieces is, when you're married to someone, you're one unit, right? And when they pass away, you very much feel, I think, like you said, grief is isolating already. And then the person that you would grieve with is gone. You're actually grieving them. So it can be, you feel very alone because you've lost that partnership. And so I think that's one kind of unique aspect. Also, just logistically, you are now left to raise your kids by yourself, take care of your house by yourself, do the financial, all things that you used to share with someone and hold together. It all now that burden falls on you, and that can feel very overwhelming, and kind of how to navigate. I mean, I always say when Bill passed away, so much of who I was passed away. Like, I went from being a wife to being single. I went to being from a 2-parent household to a single parent household. So there's just so many aspects, when your spouse passes away that are unique to that. But I would say for the most part, it's like your person that you're supposed to have to grieve with is the person you're grieving. And then just the reality of now you hold this life that you were supposed to hold with someone else by yourself. Yeah. It's very unique to spouse loss. Yeah.
Yeah, that's something that definitely, I can only in theory imagine just some of those struggles. But I love that you and Brooke, through Songs in the Night, are reaching out and supporting the widows out there. I think it's so needed. It's one of those things that grief is, while there are those commonalities, is so specific in losses that I love that God is raising up these amazing ministries and these amazing women and men to walk alongside others who are grieving and be able to really speak into it from experience, from that standpoint. So if you could encourage someone who has experienced spouse loss, either a widow or a widower, what is one thing you would say to them?
Yeah, I think one thing I've found, I think through being involved in Songs of the Night, and like you were saying, like there is just there's beauty to let people into your grief. And I've seen the beauty of that specifically with letting other widows into my grief. And I also remember, I always share with widows whose husband who had recently passed. A widow shared this with me right after my husband passed. And she said, I know you feel like you're in a dark tunnel right now and you'll never see light again, but you will see a little light, and then you'll see a little more, and you'll see a little more. And I could not hold that for myself in that moment, but she believed that for me. And so I always speak that over widows and say, I know that you probably can't see that or understand that or hold that, but I believe that for you, and I will hold that for you and your kids. And so that's been like a pivotal point of just like also the beauty of community of we can believe for those us that are a few years ahead and those that maybe have just lost, like we believe for them what they can't believe for themselves now, because we have seen God's faithfulness throughout the years since our husband has passed. And that's really like Brooke and I's heart, is we want to point them to Jesus, because he will be faithful and he will carry them through this, and to believe that there is beauty to behold from this tragedy that only Jesus can do. And we'll believe that for them the whole way through, we'll hold that for each other. So
yeah, I love that. I think there's something beautiful in that picture of holding that. In a way, it's almost like you are saying, hey, I've been there. I know what you're going through. Can you lean on my faith to get you through that? And that's something that's beautiful. And that's part of why I believe that God heals in the context of community, is because we can lend somebody our faith. I think we do this as parents all the time. Like our kids trust us as we trust God. And in doing that, we are lending them our faith. I can't give you the grace that God has given to me to walk through child loss, because you don't need that grace. You can't give me the grace that God has given to you to walk through spouse loss. But what we can do together is say, hey, I know that there's a God who's faithful in the midst of this dark tunnel, like you said, this tragedy, and he will get you through it. Even if you don't believe it, can I hold that for you? And then you can join in with that. And I think that's something so beautiful. And in fact, I think the more we talk about and share our grief stories as we process them, the better we're able to do that with people, because there's always going to be somebody that's further along on the journey of grief than we are. And there's always going to be somebody behind us. And we need both of those relationships in our lives to help us walk our grief journey well. And I don't even necessarily in that mean time-wise, because some people walk their journey at a more accelerated pace or at a different pace maybe than others. And that's not a positive, negative. It's just a fact of life. And so I love that you and Brooke and Songs in the Night are stepping into that space, just like Hope Family Care is stepping into that space for child loss. And God is using each of our unique ministries to reach out to people in the midst of their darkest times. And it's not a comparison. It's all about, hey, how do we walk together in that? Because I believe comparison gets us stuck. We get stuck in our grief, and we can, when we try to compare and contrast it. But I love that you guys are stepping into that space. So what if you could encourage or help somebody who's walking with a widow, with some of those unique aspects of what you've walked through, how would you encourage them to support a widow that's around them?
I always say first, like, just be present with them in their grief, sit with them, let them feel what they need to feel. You don't really have to you don't really need to say anything. It's really more about just your presence in the heart. I told people a lot in the beginning, they'd ask me, how can I help you? What can I do? And I just say, like, you just need to be okay with me not being okay for a while. I just knew this was going to be a process. And so being able to hold, I think too, one thing is not to try and fix it, but just to be with them in it, because you can't fix it, but you can be with them in it. And that's what they need in that moment. And I think also for a widow, like I had talked about, there's just so much now that falls on their plate alone. So just logistically bring them a meal, ask to take their kids for a couple hours, mow their lawn. And, in the shock and the aftermath of loss, there's just grief, just kind of, you have grief brain, and you can't even think about what you need tomorrow, let alone in the next 10 minutes. And so a lot of times people ask me, what do you need? And I couldn't even answer that because of where I was at in my grief. But people would just bring them the meal. Just don't even ask. Just bring a meal, leave it on their porch, or just go mow their lawn. If it looks like, just step in and help take care, or say, hey, I'm going to come get your kids and take them to a park for an hour and a half, because you are just so overwhelmed, not just with your grief, but now with what life holds for you to hold by yourself. And so, I always just say, just just be present. Your presence means so much in that, and just to be with them in their grief and to just let them feel whatever they need to feel and ask all the different questions and all the things, but just be with them.
I think that's so good, because that parallels a lot of what we share with people walking with families who've experienced child loss. I love that you said, just do. Because I know for us, when somebody asks, well, what do you need? Our answer was like, I have no idea. But when people would say, hey, can I come mow your lawn? Can I bring you this? Can I do this? Always asking, be proactive, ask that question instead of putting it on them to figure out what they need. I remember one family that we were walking with, we were at their house and I noticed the kitchen was dirty and I just started washing dishes. You know, just little things like that. You just step into that space of not knowing necessarily what they need, but just saying, hey, may I help you with this? And then what you said about presence, so important. Grief does not need to be fixed. Grief doesn't, because one, there is no fix for grief. Two, inadvertently, by trying to fix somebody's grief, we're telling them that their grief is bad. And that's not the case. Grief is the natural way that God created us to process loss. And so as we walk with somebody in grief, I always say this, you got to embrace the suck. Embrace the suck. Just, you know what? There are going to be days when you are going to be like, I've lost it. There were days when I was like, I don't want to do anything. And that's okay. That's the natural part of grieving. And so get comfortable with being uncomfortable. I think a lot of times we don't grieve well as grievers because we're afraid of the awkwardness that it's going to create in relationships where grief isn't present in the other person's life. And so it's something where we hold back our expressions of grief because we're afraid of being alienated or isolated or another relationship lost because they can't handle the emotions of our grief. Embrace the suck. Just go with it. Allow that person to be, and don't be worried, oh, I think they're slipping. You know, I don't know about you, but for us, there would be times where we're like, okay, we've made like 3 steps, and then it's like we feel like we walked 5 steps backwards, and then it's like 10, and it's just back and forth. Grief is this ebb and flow. It's like this loop spiraling up and up and up, but you go back down. And that's just a natural process of grief. What is the last thing that you would like to say or share?
I just think always, especially just around loss, you know, I say it hasn't always been easy. It hasn't always looked pretty, but God has been faithful, and he will be faithful to you in your grief. And it doesn't mean that he just takes it all away, but he will be so present in it if you invite him in and you run towards him. And there's so much I can say now, what I couldn't say in the beginning, but there's so much beauty and so much fruit to behold in grieving well with the Lord. And it's, I always tell people, you know, I'd like to stand on this side of the table and say, oh, you know, go there and it's not going to be that bad. It's going to be hard, but when you come out of the valley, what the gift of what the valley was is irreplaceable. And it's your relationship with the Lord, how you see Jesus, the way you live your life, it's irreplaceable. And so my encouragement is always to through nothing is wasted. I think he got it through Levi. Let's go, like, run towards the roar, like press into your pain with Jesus. Don't do it alone. Do it with Jesus, and do it with people that will point you to Jesus, that care for you and understand grief, a lot like what Songs in the Night is doing with other widows. And I know it's hard to see in the beginning, but there's a gift to behold through that the Lord has for you.
Oh, it's so beautiful. I love that. And so just finally, I'd like to say, if you're walking through the loss of a spouse, specifically with widows, connect with Songs in the Night. We'll leave information on how you can connect with them on either comments or on the bio link and stuff like that. But we'd encourage you to connect with them so that you don't have to journey alone. God never created us to journey alone. And then the last thing I want to say is I'd encourage you, and this is for whatever grief, whatever somebody's going through, allow yourself to feel those feelings. Allow yourself to sit in the hard pain. Because if we push it aside, it doesn't go away.
Yeah.
It just comes out in ways that we don't control. And so really just allow yourself to feel that and experience that. And when you're in the midst of that, ask God to enter in and speak the truth that he wants you to know in the midst of that. What I love, and I'll share this towards to close with, is if you look at Psalm 23, and I'm an English teacher by day, but one of the things that I notice is the Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. And then it goes in, it's talking about God in the third person. But then when you get to the valley of the shadow of death, David switches pronouns and says, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, you are with me. And I think there's that personal aspect of God entering into our pain if we turn to him. And if we turn to him, he will walk with us in the valley. He doesn't take away the pain.
Yeah.
But what he does is he makes the pain matter. Yeah. And he brings, as Davey would say with Nothing is Wasted Ministries, he brings purpose to our pain.
Yeah.
He makes it matter, and he redeems it and gives us something beautiful if we turn to him. So one of the things about Hope Unshakeable, and this is Hope Unshakeable in general, I want to share, is we've set it up where each week there is a story of loss, specifically for spouse loss. Obviously, it's going to be the loss of a spouse. Yeah. Then there's also this component of soul care where we look at scripture in a devotional. And then there's this self-care, this article or writing regarding grief itself. And then with that, throughout the book, there are different questions that we ask. And the beauty of what we feel like God has given us to Hope Unshakable that is a common theme throughout each book is, one, that all the themes are the same between all of the different losses, the specific losses, but they're geared toward each specific loss. And then with that, as you walk through the questions, you can actually continue to do and answer the questions at every point. You can revisit it 2 years later, and your answers might be different because the questions are geared toward processing where you are specifically in that moment on your grief journey. And so we've created that. While the book can be read by itself, we've set it up to where it's to be in community. Again, that aspect of healing in community. So what have you seen as you guys led that pilot group for Hope Unshakable spouse loss? What is it that you saw God do through that group component?
Yeah, I think one thing that was really impactful is to hear the widower story at the beginning, and then be able to talk about how your story, how you relate, or it's like, oh, I understand that. That's kind of similar to my story. That was kind of like a connection point to hear other stories that have walked through or felt similar things that you have felt. Also, I will say, walking in the pilot group, kind of what we talked about, of having people in our group that were kind of at different places in their grief journey. And so someone that's kind of reads the devotional and it's like, this question's hard for me, or this truth is hard for me to really grasp right now where I'm at in my grief journey. And someone else in that group is able to speak in what that has been for their grief journey, or to kind of clarify the truth, or I think there a lot in the pilot group. It was, one, just the vulnerability to share with other widows because you are in a space where you feel like people understand and you can be heard, but then to be able to speak into maybe misconstrued aspects of who Jesus is, or how he's asking you to handle your grief. I think there's just beauty to behold when people can speak into that. And we saw that a lot in the pilot group, because we did have widows that, some that had lost their husbands later on in life, some that had lost them earlier, some that were a year out, some that were 6 years out. And so there was just a lot of speaking into each other's stories and speaking into each other's process as you're processing your grief through using this curriculum. And so, like you said, though you can do it alone, I think there's going to be so much more meat and growth when you have people that understand and have walked the journey, walk it with you. And I think too, we saw telling your story, that's such a vulnerable space. And then there's just safety in telling your story to someone that has a very similar story and can feel like they can hold it. You know, I think with other widows, there's just a comfort there that you don't have to explain things, or things that you might say maybe like too much, or people be like, "Ugh, how can you say that?" The widows understand because they've walked that road. And so telling your story, it just seems like a very safe place to hold that and to begin to learn how to do that well. Yeah.
Yeah. I love that. I think you're absolutely right.
Yeah.
The telling your story in that moment, it's almost like it becomes this sacred space where you hold that tension of, this has happened, this is tragic, and in this place I feel safe to share that, because I don't have to explain, I don't have to, you know, put a caveat on, but I can express who I am. And what I love about God in the aspect or the component of grief is God is a God who can handle our emotions. Yeah. He's not afraid of our anger. He's not afraid of our doubt. He's not afraid of our questions, but rather he embraces them, because I think what he knows better than we do is that when we wrestle with those emotions and allow ourselves to feel them, especially in the context of others who continue to point us back to him, we grow deeper and we grow stronger in our faith with God. And so I'd encourage you, if you're kind of on the fence about joining a grief group, this isn't a Bible study where they're going to ask you, hey, you know, what did Paul do after this missionary journey or whatever, and how does the Holy Spirit? It's not about that. It's about processing where you're at. And so if a question's too hard, you can hold off on answering it, and nobody's going to judge you. Or if you're like, man, this question is one that like, it really hit home, I really want to share a lot about this. Sometimes some groups will focus on one question the whole time, and that's okay. Each Hope Unshakable group is meant to help those who are in that group process where they're at. Not because it's this roadmap that you have to walk or these specific steps that you have to take, but rather it's because when we come together, we walk together. When we walk together, we can walk farther than we would if we walked by ourselves. So Amy, thank you so much for this time. We appreciate it, and we're excited for what God has for you and Brooke and Songs in the Night moving forward, and also what God has for our two ministries partnering together in the future. So thank you so much for taking time to be with us this morning.
Thank you. Yeah, you're welcome.